And then one day I was on the phone with somebody staring at my computer and Word was open and I saw this button that said dictate and I was like, what? Hold the phone. I can dictate right into Word. So what I do now is I turn on Word and I hit dictate and I just start talking. The riverbed of my life was dug up and redirected in this deep and profound way. I've made deep and lasting changes. All the other stuff was just surface, even after decades. So there's this just gigantic treasure trove of tools and tips and tricks and recovery, and I want to get them out to the world.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Welcome to another episode. Today, I am talking to Barb Nangle. She is an incredible human being and podcaster with over 150 podcast episodes. And the majority of those are solo episodes. During this episode, we are talking about starting with no strategy, how Barb has come up with her strategy and a strategy that actually works for her and for her process in creating consistent content, and the ways in which she's able to really be able to get a great idea and keep her listeners in mind and do things that are working to ensure that she's able to produce a podcast on a weekly and regular basis. So join me in welcoming Barb Nangle to the podcast. Hello, Barb. I am so stinking excited to have you on the show today.
Yay.
It's just, it's going to be glorious. So glorious. So if you could just tell everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Sure. I'm really excited to be here too, especially after listening to so many fabulous episodes. So I am Barb Nangle. I am a boundaries coach. I'm founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. And my podcast is called Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. And I just recorded episode 153 this past weekend.
Oh my goodness. It's so incredible. And
Yeah.
I have had the honor of watching your journey over the last, I want to say 2 years
Yeah,
now?
I think about 2 years ago was when we met. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And it's just been so incredible, your growth as a podcaster. But let's go back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We've been interviewing quite a few people who are at that 100, 150 mark, and there's a lot of resistance that can happen with starting a podcast and kind of taking that step. So what did that start look like for you?
So honestly, it was kind of accidental. So I decided through a whole series of serendipitous events that I was going to start a coaching business. And I did a couple of coaching sessions myself with another coach. And she was encouraging me to do YouTube videos. And I was like, why do people need to see me? And I was like, all right, fine. So I bought a little lavalier mic and I bought a little thing and I did an adult education session on how to do YouTube videos. And I hadn't quite started yet. And in the meantime, I do a lot of networking. I'm in New Haven, Connecticut. And one of the people I know goes by the moniker Rev Kev, and he runs Baobab Tree Studios in downtown New Haven. And he had said to me, hey, when you get back from your trip, I want to talk to you about a possible job. And what he wanted to do with his studio was create almost like a podcasting channel. I don't know if I'm describing it correctly. And he wanted me to do the sales and marketing for the ads for the podcast. And I was like, I don't do sales and marketing. I'm a connector. And he was the second person that had approached me for that. But I was like, I might want to do a podcast. And what he told me was he was having this podcast pitch event where he would invite all these people to come in and pitch their idea for a podcast. And there wasn't going to be a winner. It was just going to be, if they like your idea and they feel like you'll follow through, they'll produce it for free. And I was like, okay. So I pitched and they were like, this is amazing. You should totally do this. So my first 3 episodes, I drove to downtown New Haven, went into the studio, recorded it while he was sitting there. And I decided to do it every other week because I didn't know if I would have enough content to do it weekly, which is hilarious now, because since then it's been weekly. In the meantime, let me just put a pin in that and say that I had previously started recording audiobooks. I created a quote studio in a closet in my basement. I had downloaded Audacity free program. I bought a good mic, a good set of headphones. I know we're going to get to the story of me recording audiobooks in a little while, so I won't go into that right now. I said to him one day, wait a minute, like I have a studio in my basement. Can I just record and email them to you? And he was like, absolutely, because it would save so much time for both of us because he wouldn't have to sit there and listen to me record and then go back and produce. I wouldn't have to drive to downtown New Haven and park and blah, 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 blah. So since probably episode 3, I've been recording at home, and my episodes are usually 10 to 20 minutes. And it's me sharing what we call in 12-step recovery, my experience, strength, and hope, which is what I've learned in recovery. That's different than, what I've learned other places. When I got to episode 100, I decided to celebrate that milestone by having some guests. That went over pretty well. And then I decided from then on, every 10th episode, I'm going to have a guest. So those episodes tend to be longer, 30 to 45 minutes. But I just talk on specific topics. A lot of the other recovery podcasts I had heard were a person sharing their whole story. So they might touch on a bunch of topics, and I was very specific that I want to talk about one topic or maybe 2, so that like one of my most popular episodes is on acceptance, like how to be accepting. Because like if I want to learn about acceptance, I don't want to listen to a whole story and be like, are they going to talk about acceptance? I want to be able to find like the topic I want to talk about. I do a lot of outreach in recovery, which means calling, brand new people and sharing my story with them, checking in on people. And I found myself saying the same things over and over again. I was like, why don't I just record this? And that's kind of how it started.
Oh, what a journey. My goodness.
Yeah.
So there's so many different parts that we can pull out, right? Like that someone else outside of yourself saying, hey, I have this idea. Let's try this thing, see how it goes. And then that outside accountability tends to work really well, especially for people who are like, I want to try out this thing. Let's see if it works, see if it's a thing. Was there any point where you felt like, I don't know if I can do this anymore?
No.
Why is that?
Well, I want to reference something that I learned from Giovanni Marsico. He runs, among other things, the Archangel Academy, and he's a coach. And he talks about that, at least for him, the thing we got in trouble for when we were children is often our gift. So when he was a kid, he got in trouble for dreaming. He was told, get your head out of the clouds. And his gift is actually not just making his dreams fulfilled, but helping other people's dreams fulfilled. And so when he said, I encourage you to think about, like, what did you get in trouble for as a kid? And I was like, oh, I always got in trouble for talking. My gift is talking. I do feel that carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer is my calling. And I've heard it said that a calling is where your deep desire meets the world's need. That is a calling. And so this is a calling for me. So I don't have a choice, but it's not like I'm being compelled to do it from the outside. I don't have a choice because I'm driven to do this.
Oh, so good. And 100 episodes, 100 solo episodes. Now, some listeners might be thinking, what? Like, no way could I talk about 100 different things. How do you do it? How do you come up with content and kind of get it out of yourself? Like, obviously this is like something that you feel that you have to put out into the world, and you enjoy it and you love it and you show up really well for your audience. But like, how do you come up with so much content? And let's also note and not negate the fact that yes, they are 10 to 15 minute episodes, but that doesn't mean that you're any less of a podcaster because you have a concise and consistent way of expressing your thoughts.
Right. Yeah. So on that note, I want to say one of my listeners, I had a call with her and she said, Barb, before we talk about what we're going to talk about, I need you to know like how much I love your episode. And what she said to me was, it's like mind medicine for me. There are no wasted words and you don't leave any loose ends. And so, yes, they're concise, but there's some good stuff in there. So the way that it started was I went to the index of some of my favorite recovery books and looked up topics and I made a list, like probably like a 3-page bulleted list document. I think I looked at it 4 times. I still have that document. But then what happens for me in terms of topic is either I hear something on a podcast, I hear something in a recovery meeting, I have an issue myself, I'm dealing with an issue with a sponsee, and I'm like, that would be a great podcast episode. I have a lot of what some people call divine downloads. I call them divine inspiration. And so I have at the top of that document a shorter bulleted list. But when it comes to actually recording, I have got to feel it. I think there may have been one episode, definitely one, maybe 2 that I've recorded that I sort of like forced it because I needed to record something. But every other time, like I have some that are half fleshed out because when I started doing it, I was like, this feels like the right thing. And I got partway through and I was like, no, I'm not. And I'm going to go back and finish it at some point. And some of them I have picked up later. And so it's a combination of things, but it's really like I get inspired by what either I need to hear or I'm hearing that other people need to hear. But one thing I do a lot of is a lot of mindset shifts. That's a huge part of what recovery is. We have these ideas or these beliefs that we often don't even know that we have that are blocking our lives from developing.
Yeah.
And so when I hear and see those, especially if it's a shift that I've made that's been profound in my life, I feel the need to talk about it. That's kind of how I come up with the ideas.
I have to agree with you. Whenever it comes to like solo episodes or creating content, like I really have to, unless I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, I tend to have to be in the mood to talk. But I think that's why it's so important to understand yourself and understand what works best for you. And we'll go back to that before we go back to that. I also want to point out that you did market research, and we have an episode on market research and doing market research for your podcast. If you are like, I don't know what to talk about, or what do I do, or what is this launch going to look like? So if you're a listener, go back and listen to that episode. But I love what you did and like pulling what are other people talking about? What are some of those common threaded things that my audience is going to want to know about and understand? I also love the fact that you have your listener in mind constantly. So you have very clearly defined who that person is. How did you kind of get to the process of like, oh wait, no, this is who my listener is?
It didn't take me any time at all. It was, I'm carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer. I share this stuff with people in recovery all the time. So my target market is people in 12-step recovery. And honestly, like I have this, I guess it's not secret anymore, but I've had this secret mission for a long time, which I want to take the tools and tips and tricks of recovery and bring them out to the world, because I'm like a self-help junkie. I was in therapy for decades. I've read a gajillion self-help books, workshops, workbooks, work groups, retreat, you name it. But when I got to recovery, it felt like the riverbed of my life was dug up and redirected in this deep and profound way. I've made deep and lasting changes. All the other stuff was just surface, even after decades. So there's this just gigantic treasure trove of tools and tips and tricks in recovery, and I want to get them out to the world. So though my target market is people in recovery, who I'm really targeting is people who want their life to change and know that it's up to them, or they're finding out that it's up to them. But it's really people in recovery. because those are my people. And the other thing is, like, I didn't know that I qualified for recovery until I stumbled my way into it at the age of 52. When I am talking as if I am talking to a fellow in recovery. That's who I'm always talking to someone. I don't usually have a specific person in mind.
Right.
But it's, generic person in recovery,
Yeah.
Or maybe you might even say former me.
You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together. Yeah. What would I have needed to know? Yes. I love that. You externally process your episodes. And I know this because we work together, but I love, like, your hands don't work maybe the way that you want them to, right? And so you had to find a way, kind of a roundabout way of being able to create an outline or a script or something so that way you could podcast. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So what I started doing when I very first started was typing out a bulleted list of what I wanted to talk about, because I knew I needed to do some reading, but I didn't want to sound like I was reading. So I felt like a bulleted list would work. And I have an issue with my right hand, which I'm told is probably the onset of carpal tunnel syndrome. And so I try to minimize the amount of typing that I can do. And so what I started doing was recording into an email on my phone and then just copying and pasting that into a Word document. And then one day I was on the phone with somebody staring at my computer and Word was open and I saw this button that said dictate and I was like, what? Hold the phone. I can dictate right into Word. So what I do now is I turn on Word and I hit dictate and I just start talking as if I am talking to a person in recovery. Then I go back and I edit it. So I take out, things like and ah, and I say so a lot when I'm talking. And then sometimes I rearrange it. Mostly I don't change a lot of it, but sometimes I rearrange the order of stuff, but not often. And then I read that bulleted list when I'm recording. And what's really interesting is I've known for a long time that journaling is good for me because I sort of decide what I think when I write. Like when I was growing up and I was told to make an outline before writing a paper, I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to write about. How can I make an outline? I have to write and then take what I wrote and turn it into an outline and organize it because I don't know what I'm going to think. I don't know what I think about things until I write because I'm able to stay on topic when I write. Well, it turns out that's this external processing that you're talking about. I decide what I think. I make conclusions when I'm talking. It happens to me all the time when I'm talking to people in recovery. I'm like, holy shit, I just came up with that. Or when I'm coaching my clients too. I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. I'm going to write that shit down, and so it happens when I am externally processing when I'm talking about a topic. And so sometimes what'll happen, this happened to me last week. I was preparing the episode that I thought I was going to record. And I thought I was going in one direction and I went in a completely different direction that I didn't know I was going to go. And I was like, yeah, I'm not prepared for this because this is bigger than I thought it was going to be. So I'm going to put this aside. Actually, what happened this past weekend was I had a situation happen to me that was 100% the reason I was able to turn it around was because of everything I learned in recovery. And I just basically was like, here's what just happened to me this weekend. Like, that's another thing that happens. Like, stuff happens and I'm like, I have to do an episode about this and I need to do it right now while I'm in it and while I'm feeling it because people will feel that when they hear me.
Yes. 100%. Oh, so good. I love that you have found a way that works best for you
Yeah.
in understand, like being able to portray your message, and also, like, I know I say this all the time, guys, but like, know yourself, know what works best
Mm.
for you. And yes, you might be at the point where you're like, I have no idea. Test
Mhm.
out a few different things, try it
Right.
out, see what's kind of going on. For me, I tend to need not even so much external processing, but more external validation of my
Mm.
thoughts. And so I'll have these thoughts of like, okay, this is how this should go, or I think this is how this should go. And I tend to go to people who I value their opinions, and I will ask them, hey, this is kind of where I'm going with this. What are your thoughts? And usually I
Mm.
don't really need their opinion. I already have my opinion. I know what I'm probably going to do.
Mhm.
But I tend to need to externally get it out of myself and externally process it that way before I take action on
Mhm.
something. So that's a different twist on you externally processing what your situation is and what the topic it is that you're trying to get across. But like knowing that about yourself, and even like you said, years of therapy that you've gone through, that are like, okay, what is going on here? You
Mhm.
know, and the recovery process, like these are all things that people can do to better understand who they are. And I
Mhm.
found in working with a coach, I work with a life coach and life and business coach who's fantastic. Absolutely love her. And been able to better understand how is it that I approach life? How is it that I approach things so that I can work better and be better as
Mhm.
whatever kind of human being that I want to be.
Yeah. When you were just saying that you're a big fan of people knowing themselves and knowing what works for them, I just really want to underscore that. Like, you get to live your life the way that you want. So, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a boundaries coach, and that's really what having healthy boundaries is all about, living your life on purpose. And I'll tell you, that is one of the reasons why I'm able to do 150 episodes, why it is sustainable for me, because I am doing what works for me. And here's the blessing: when you live your life the way you really want to live it, yeah, you might lose some people. But what's going to happen is the new people that come in are going to be like totally on board with this version of you. And that means if you're doing your podcast in a way that works for you, the people that are going to be on board are going to be super fans. So here's an example: I swear a lot. I've only ever had one person say to me, "Do you really need to go with the F word all the time?" And I'm like, "Yes, actually, I do." I have had dozens of people say to me, "Oh my God, I love that you swear." It's clear you're being really authentic. And one woman who actually met me in person first before listening to my podcast said, "When you came out with the F word in the first 3 minutes of I met you, I was like, I'm in. Like, I love this woman because like I'm not faking the funk with people." And
Mhm.
yep, there are some people who don't like swearing. Well, they're not my people and they don't need to listen to my podcast.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to offend anybody, but if you're offended by my podcast, listen to a different podcast because there's a gajillion of them out there.
Yeah. Showing up as yourself, right? I think is so, so important. I've been talking obviously to tons of podcasters, and there was one person, and I'm blanking on the name at the moment, but I was talking to someone and she was saying that she had listened to someone's show, absolutely loved them, like loved them as a person, what they were talking about. It was so good, such a great connection. Met them in real life and was like, that's not you. Like, you're not the same on the podcast as you are in real life. And that's weird. Like,
Yeah.
because podcasting is so intimate, right? And I
Yeah.
think that we tend to forget, especially
Mhm.
as podcasters, that people are listening in the shower, on their dog
Mhm.
walk,
Mhm.
while
Mhm.
they're,
Mhm. Mhm.
doing
And
dishes.
maybe binge listening,
And binge listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Like,
Yeah.
it's such an intimate thing. You're in people's, what I like to call their earballs. You're in their earballs constantly.
Mhm.
And you create this connection with them
Mhm.
where it's like you're their best friend. You don't know it, but
Mhm.
they do.
Mhm.
And they have
Yeah.
such a deep connection with you. And I think it's
Yeah.
so, so, so stinking important to, as podcasters, show up as you. Don't try to be someone else or produce it different or be different. Yes, you can have a quality podcast and it can be overproduced, but the things that you're saying and the way that you're saying it should always be a reflection of who you are as a person.
Yeah. So I will tell you, like, I've had a number of times when I do a call with a prospective client, they'll hop on the line and they'll be like, "Oh my God, I feel like I know you." And I'm like, "Do you listen to my podcast?" And they go, "Yeah." And I go, "Then you do."
Yes.
You totally do. Because that's me. That's who I am. And I have a number of friends who listen to my podcast, and some of whom have moved away now. And they're like, "Barb, you have no idea how much I love that I get to hear my friend Barb. And I feel like you are talking to me," because I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that so much. So if you take anything from this episode, know what works best for you and always show up as your most authentic self on your podcast. And that is what is going to create a deeper connection with your audience and allow them to, when you do get on the phone with them or they slide in your DMs or whatever, they feel like they know you. They feel like they have a connection with you and you're not able, like, you don't burn out with your podcast and you're still able to show up for them on a consistent basis. So absolutely love that.
You know, I would like to say just a little something about authentic, and I cannot remember who I heard this from, and that there's a caveat to this authenticity. And the example the person used was, let's say you bought a ticket to go see Beyonce, right? And she is having a horrendous day. You don't want her horrendous day authentic self to be on stage because you paid buku dollars. You waited for months to go see her. This is like a lifetime of buildup of expectation. And you want her to go out there and be the star Beyonce, not the authentic woman who's having a shitty ass day, right? So that's the beauty of a podcast is you can be your authentic self, but if you're having a horrendous day, unless it's appropriate, like in my podcast, it's appropriate for me if I'm having a horrendous day, and then to tell you how I use the tools of recovery to manage my life. That would be authentic for me. But if you're having a horrendous day, then record your podcast on another day, right? You know, that's the beauty of it. So I do want to say that about authenticity, because we want you to be the real you. But if you're having a horrendous day, then, you know, maybe it's not appropriate to record your podcast that day, or just, whatever you got to do to get past it. If you have to record it that day, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think it's so important. And I mean, that's the beauty of podcasting, right? Like the ability to show up in your leggings or your pajamas and just hair's wild, don't care, but show up as you vocally, as your best self, and as someone who your audience can connect with, and you can use it to really be able to take that relationship deeper with your audience without having to be in front of them on social media or compete with so many different things that are happening in the world. You know, like if someone gets onto your podcast and is listening, they want to be there. And so show up with that in mind. Like you don't have to be a flashy show. You don't have to be anything other than you. And that's just, I love that.
Yeah. So I did want to say a few things about one, I wanted to talk about like how I came to work with you and what it's been like.
Sure.
And then I also want to tell my story that I know you know the story that I want to tell about the desire. So I worked with Rev Kev from Baobab Tree Studios for my first 130 episodes. And what a blessing. Like he literally planted the seed and got me started and everything. But I went to a summit that Alicia was one of the people. And I was like, oh my God, she's amazing. And she offered for, I think it was $97 to do a podcast on it. I was like, absolutely. And so she listened to 5 of my recent episodes. We had a meeting and she was like, boom, 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 you know, do these things. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So one thing she told me, which was that I want to optimize the titles of my episodes for SEO. Now I knew this about the articles I was writing and publishing on Medium, but somehow it escaped me for the titles of my podcast. So if you look at all my podcast episodes, you can literally see Oh, that's the week that she spoke with Alicia because my titles changed. It was like gratitude, acceptance, negative thought loops, right? And then it was like, how to overcome victim mentality was like the new title, right? So, there was that. You also talked to me about like hashtagging and where I'm publishing my podcast and, how to just all kinds of amazing strategies. And then finally in October of this past year, starting with episode 131, I was actually to the point where I could hire Alicia to be my producer, and things have gotten more and more and more strategic. She just full of gems of wisdom and has helped me so much. One of the things lately that we did on my last strategy call, which by the way, I've told her the strategy calls alone are worth what I pay her per month. And I get to have 2 of them, but I only do 1 because I'm like, I can't even do all the stuff we talk about in the first one. But the last one, she shared with me a podcasting Facebook group. And in the last 4 weeks, I've booked 6 podcast guest appearances. And I have like 3 or 4 more in the works. So like just working with you has been really amazing. And I really appreciate all of the strategies that you give me. And I had already decided to start working with her. And somehow it escaped my notice that you had started your Listeners to Leads podcast. So from the time when I decided I already was hiring you and you were going to be starting to work, we were going to start working together. I binge listened to every one of your episodes and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Oh my God, this is amazing. Oh my God. Like, what am I going to get when I start paying her? This is the free stuff that I'm getting, especially the dynamic content episode. I was like you and I talked about it. I was like, literally that could be your entire podcast is just talking about dynamic content and how the value of that. So I just wanted to share, all of that if you are even thinking of working with Alicia, totally do it. It is like you see all the cool stuff you get for free. You're just not going to believe how helpful it's going to be to have her hold your hand, because I started with 0 strategy, none. And I've just built it as time has gone on. And then the other story that I am dying to share that Alicia knows is this. So I started listening to books on tape when I was probably around 20. I'm about to be 59 next week. And this is when they were on cassette tapes. And I would only listen to them when I walked because I wanted to compel myself to exercise. And I really enjoyed listening to books on tape. And since day 1 of listening to books on tape, I have wanted to narrate audiobooks. I've just really wanted to do it. And for a number of years ago, I ended up volunteering for 5 years for Reading for the Blind and Dyslexic. Like that's how much I wanted to record audiobooks. And the only reason I stopped was because they closed the New Haven office for budgeting reasons. And then a few years ago, I was working in a co-working place in New Haven, which is now closed. And one of the women I met there told me she was narrating audiobooks. And I was like, what? How are you doing that? She was like, just read this book. It'll tell you how to do it. So I read the book. Like I said earlier, I downloaded Audacity. I got the mic. I got the earbuds. I created a studio in my basement closet, which, by the way, has since moved to my bedroom closet because there was a time when my neighbors were doing construction in the basement and I couldn't do it. And I moved upstairs and I was like, this is so much easier. So I literally have a couple of sound absorbing tiles in my closet. And that's it. And then I have a shelf thing that my thing sits on, and I just use my closet. So anyway, I start recording audiobooks, and this is right like maybe 6 weeks or so before Rev Kev approached me about the podcasting thing. And I start doing it, and I hate it because the vast majority of the time is not narrating audiobooks.
Right.
It's doing all the technical stuff and the production and all that stuff. And it was like, oh my God, I hate it. Well, then in the last couple of years, I've had 3 different people give me the message that if you have a desire in you, it is there for a reason. The universe planted the desire in you. So one of those people was Emily Fletcher from Ziva Meditation. One was, her name is escaping me. She wrote the book, The Desire Factor. And I don't remember who the third one was, but this is the deal. If you have a desire that you've had for a very long time, it is there for a reason. That desire will come to fruition in this world somehow. And this is why sometimes at the same time, two different people will event the same thing in the world. So what I believe, having heard that, is that the universe planted the desire for me to be a podcaster when I was about 20, except that the technology of podcasting didn't even exist back then. So it disguised it as the desire to narrate audiobooks.
Yeah.
How beautiful is that? So let me tell you, dear listeners, if you have a desire, follow it. Follow that desire. You don't know where it's going to take you. And maybe the technology does not exist for the thing you have the desire for, but just wait. Just keep going in the direction that your desire is leading you, because it's there for a reason.
Oh, yes. What an incredible note to end on. Jeez.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? That was so
I
good.
think we end. Yeah.
Yes. That's a good place to stop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Barb, for being on the show and sharing such an incredible podcasting experience and just how you're able to show up for your audience in such an incredible way, in such an incredibly important niche. As someone who has family members with addiction, recovery is such an important process.
Absolutely.
So I commend all of the work you do. So absolutely, I love absolutely everything you do and produce.
Thank you.
So
the feeling is mutual.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Where can people find you, listen to your podcast, work with you if they need help?
So you can listen to my podcast on any podcast outlet, or if you are like on your phone and want to go to the web, fragmentedtowhole.com will take you right to my page that has it. And then it has links to every podcast outlet. So you can click on your favorite app and it will take you right to that. My website is higherpowercc.com. My favorite place to hang out on social media is on Instagram I'm at Higher Power Coaching. I mentioned I do boundaries coaching. I also have a ton of free resources on boundaries. Lots of it is on Instagram, so follow me there. But there's also a page on my website. So if you go to my website, higherpowercc.com, there's a menu that says My Issue Is. And if you pick the one that says Setting Boundaries, you'll see a ton of free resources, including some maybe 17 episodes specifically about boundary setting. Because that has been the game changer in terms of my growth and development and the deep lasting changes I've made in my life, which is why I became a boundaries coach.
Yes, I love it. And we're going to have an episode on the show all about boundaries around your podcast. So awesome. What a great connection. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much for being on the show. We'll make sure that we have links for all of that stuff. Yay. Thank you, Barb.
All righty. Thanks, Alicia. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.